Welcome back to Brands and Banter, the podcast where we interview cool people from cool brands. And we're going to be sitting down with somebody that's very cool today, which is Bill Schiffmiller. Bill Schiffmiller's an amazing talent who has founded the company called Akoio that focuses on auditory wellness and consultation there. And they are pioneering a discussion that many people aren't having yet. But long before his endeavor to Akoio, he started out in the photography world and then the creative world and the art direction world, found his way to professing at Pratt University and ultimately landed at Apple, where he had led accessibility for many years there. So somebody who understands consultation, understands brand, and how to marry those two worlds together. I think you're going to find a lot of insight from this conversation that we have with Bill today, and I hope that you have a good one, and let us know after the conversation how you feel about it. All right, welcome to Brands and Banter. We have my good friend, Bill Schiffmiller, who's hanging out with us today. Listen, Bill, we're going to have a lot to talk about, but before we start, I kind of want to talk a little bit about your accent. You have a very unique accent, something that people have mistaken for European or Austrian or whatever it may be. Can you kind of give me the history behind it?
Well, a lot of people think I'm related to Arnold Schwarzenegger, so I'll be back. And it does have that kind of South African, Italian, German kind of accent. But really, Max, I call it my deaf accent. I am hard of hearing, and I did go through speech therapy for 13 years, and I guess that's my accent. That's how it came about. And what I love about that is, unique accent as opposed to a speech impediment. So I'm glad I can pull it off with this kind of cool, unique accent.
Well, and that's the thing too, is I think you rock it so well. You've always been able to sport it and knock it out of the park with that. And it's such a great conversation starter, especially given, your role and the way that you've developed a career path to this point, which we'll talk about that. I kind of want to go a little bit back to your start, because when you were younger, did you kind of know what you wanted to do when you were growing up, or was it something that just kind of unveiled itself?
I grew up around magazines, and Life magazine, National Geographic were my go-to to learn about the world, and it was because of great photography. Though there was no question in my mind that I was going to be a photojournalist or even a fashion photographer. I wanted to be out there looking at beautiful people and their wardrobe and take amazing pictures, because I was inspired by Richard Avedon, who was a well-known photographer back in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. So I wanted to be a photographer, and later on, I had that great opportunity to work behind the scenes at Life magazine and got to meet all those great photographers whose work we have come to love and learn about the world through their lens, through their vision. And so I went down a different path in and around photography. Now, of course, that changed later on, but I knew I wanted to be a photographer.
And one of the things that I want to talk about too along the way is when you were on that path, was your hearing a part of the adversity of growing on that path? Did it make it just a little bit more difficult to find your success along the way?
Absolutely. Now, because I didn't get my hearing aid until I was 6 years old, my world was visual. So I managed to fool everybody by lip reading and following facial expression and body language. It was when I got my hearing aid that, he's got hearing aid. It's noticeable. It feedback a lot. And kids used to make fun of me. They called me 4 eyes and 4 ears. How creative was that? And, kids will be kids. Early on in my career, sure, I believe that there were missed career opportunities or job opportunities because the hiring manager was probably, I'm not so sure about this guy with the hearing aid now. Can I prove it? No, but, we're on a destiny. Wherever it takes us, that's where it'll take you. But yeah, there was adversity, and sure, there was times where there was socially awkward moments because it was hard to have a conversation. And also, Max, back in the day, they were only analog hearing aids, meaning they only made things louder. So you didn't have all these bells and whistles that you have today with these control, with the background and feedback. No, these things were loud. They whistled feedback a lot. So that made me very conscious and therefore made me very awkward socially. And when I would have conversation with people, I couldn't make out what they were saying. So I would not be surprised, Max, if there were moments where people would ask me open question when it was really, I would say yes or no. So, how old are you? Yes. Where are you from? No. And it was like, I'm sure I had those moments. So, I would look at adversity that way as a challenge. Was I deprived? Sure, I might have been deprived of opportunity, but guess what? I found another path.
And the other thing that I've always admired about you is you are just so optimistic about the things that you have to overcome and you've had to overcome in your career. And every time that I'm with you, I feed off of your energy because you find a way to spin something that might be difficult into a cool opportunity or into something exciting, and you do it with a smile. And I think that kind of energy really is a part of the story of how you have been able to carve out such an amazing and successful career. And I kind of want to speak on this too, because you and I are similar in the sense that we have worked in the same field. As, a designer and a creative, you spent 15 years in the creative field, okay? And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. When you think of those days in the creative and design field, what comes to mind? Is there any highlights and any things that you kind of just want to get nostalgic about?
When I was working at Life as an art assistant, I got to see the power of an image and how it would tell a story. Now, as a reader, sure, those images were edited and that was presented to you published, but I got to see behind the scene what it is that the editor and the photographers were looking for to understand what went into that image. I was like, holy cow, because I soon learned that it takes a lot to get that image. It's no different from, I look at design, it takes a lot to see what the problem is and what is the solution. So for me, when it comes to design, it's the OXO Good Grip product, it's the vegetable peeler. The idea that they were introducing universal design into something that would make things easier in people's lives that we take for granted, that was where I felt, wow, design has an amazing play here. It's not about something that looks pretty and cool and all that. It's got to have a purpose. It's got to be functional. And that's where I got excited. It's looking through photography on the human experience, and now how do we design for that human experience?
And would you say that the functionality is, when you pair that with design, would you say that that's kind of the most critical thing that helps design impact businesses and start to really boost them up when you think about how can design help me if you're on the outside and you don't interface with that kind of technology or capability?
Yeah, so I have a degree in design management from Pratt, and so what that's about is how can design be strategic to businesses. And I love that. And so the idea is, okay, whom are we solving for and why? You can have a nice, nifty thing, but is there a market for it? And whenever I ask questions about what we're solving, I'm looking at the whole gamut of what that experience is going to be like, from the ideation to delivery. And sometimes when you have that great design, it may not be feasible. There may not be a market for it. And so I need to look at it not just from the end user, but what is it going to take to get it to the end user? And is it viable? Is it lucrative? Is it doable? I would look at all of those things when it comes into a great design.
So speaking on your multiple hats that you've had in your career, you have been on the consulting side as well as on the brand side. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the difference between those two perspectives?
Yeah, so on the consulting side, it's all about, like what I mentioned earlier, whom are you serving? What are you trying to deliver? What's the goal? What's the purpose? On the brand side, it's like, what are our values? What are we doing to deliver on those values, maybe in terms of product and services? And so as a consultant, I take that into account so I could better ask the question as a consultant. Having been on the development side, being a brand ambassador at Apple, as well as being an entrepreneur, having developed, invented a product, so I understand that development side, which also led to that brand experience. So with that experience, I am able as a consultant to understand what are the nuances of the brand that you need to be considering. And also, it's great to come in where I'm not part of your groupthink. I'm not part of that single brand. I'm coming in as an outsider who knows how to develop this, but also has some key questions. So you may be saying that your brand is XYZ, but coming from the outside, you know what? The perception isn't that. So it's always nice to come in as an outsider going in as a consultant.
Well, I think, that being able to provide a fresh set of eyes or opinions to whatever the problems may be with a brand is critical because, and I think you said it best there. Folks get way too attached to their brand or way too attached to the project, and then they get tunnel vision and they can't separate themselves personally from what the goals are, what the objective is. And I think you, with your specific skill set, understanding what it's like to be on the brand side, but also asking those key questions on the outside that are critical. You have to be able to manage both, is why I think many brands would be very smart to hire you with helping solve their problems.
Well, I agree with you, and it's always so refreshing to come in and you be astonished, and I'm sure you experience this, Max, what they don't know. And it's like, you're in this space, what, you're not aware of that? Oh my goodness, why are you in this business? And I think a lot of it too has to do with, so what is your work culture like? What kind of project are you working on? Do you need to be sent to some retreat and rethink about your brand and the value and the work you're doing? Sometimes we all need that. And to be in the grind day after day, doing the same thing over and over, it's like, let's jazz it up a little bit. Let's do a refresher. You're always drinking Lipton tea. No offense to Lipton, but how about get excited about herbal tea and red zinger and lemon zest, and let's jazz it up a little. That's what I'd like to do with the client. Is you're doing your work well, but let's get you out of that. Let's get down. I'm not suggesting that they're bland, but let's go beyond salt and pepper and lemongrass and ginger and stuff like that. That's what I love to do. And I think you do too. It's like, wow, I like what you guys are doing. How about this? Does that seem reasonable? Can we do that? Gee, Max, we never even thought about that. Yeah, of course we can. Brilliant.
Well, I think, it's so funny because we actually just read this really cool report on how brands are just a little bit too bland. They're playing it a little bit too safe, and it speaks to exactly what you just said there. Do you think that brands need an outside voice like yours or like ours that can really come in and help prevent them from being bland? You know what I mean? Help prevent a Cracker Barrel kind of situation, if you remember that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I find that fascinating. Well, what I've been keeping an eye on, and I recently wrote about this in Forbes, is we need to remember who we are as humans. Where did the role of emotion come into play for our brand? And I think many brands are losing touch with the emotion and of their customers, even internally of their people. Are we relatable to the customer, the end user, at the end of the day? If not, where can we make that connection? Where can we be relevant? Where can we align? I think we're losing touch on that. And coming off of the pandemic, coming off of the, everybody having an opinion and all that, and we're always taking different sides, and we're being divisive, excuse me, that's the word I was looking for, divisive. We need to remind ourselves we're human, we have emotions, let's reconnect. So do brands, they need to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Brands definitely should have emotions and should have personality and should be alive and relative for the folks that engage with them. I kind of want to ask you another question just about your career when you were coming up. I think all of us can relate to maybe some hard times that taught us a lesson that maybe was a blessing. When you think back on your career, was there a key turning point in your career that taught you something really critical and valuable, maybe losing a job along the way, or a personal epiphany that happened on a project? Is there something that comes to mind when you think about a turning point?
Yeah, so I remember I used to be art director of trade publication, and I knew I had to get out of it. I was very unhappy. This was at a time where desktop publishing was shifting. Desktop publishing was demanding that you as art director have to play many roles, wear many hats, and I was not happy with that. And as a result, I was fired from the job. And my brother-in-law said to me at the time, "Congratulations, now you can do what you want to do." And that's when I decided to go back to grad school at Pratt Institute and get my master's in design management. My father was a businessman. At 7 p.m. with dinner, I learned about his world of business at the dinner table. And because I got to know about his world in plexiglass and acrylic and lucite, I got to learn about the properties of those materials. I got to learn about the customers, the fabricators, the warehouses. So I love that stuff. I love the logistics. I love the relationship that he was having with all the people involved. And I was like, I like design. I like visual. Can we marry the two? And sure enough, design management came into play at Pratt Institute. It was a new program. I think I was maybe the second or third class to get into it. It was an executive style program where we would meet every other weekend for 18 months. And that's where I learned design can be strategic to businesses. And I'm like, oh, that's yummy. I like that. I could be able to say to decision makers and ask questions. Then I could say, design could do this. We could save you money by doing this. It's not about something that looks good or, has beautiful annual report and all that and collateral, but no, it can be very strategic. And I remember working on something, and the owner came over and said, "Thank you very much." I go, "For what?" "You just saved me $500,000. And that we're understanding what people are going through. What are the challenges and how can design have a role? I'll give you an example, Max. There was the back office for an insurance company. And customers would call in and looking for some kind of insurance policy. But I got to watch the agent at work, and he had to go in and out of different legacy systems to find the product that he was looking for. By the time he had an answer for the customer, 2 minutes have gone by. And I turned to the manager and I asked, do you have high absenteeism rate among your people? And he goes, yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. Why? And I go, well, look, you have an antiquated system. So at the end of the day, the management consulting group I was with came up with a more streamlined system for the agent to use. So it's those kind of things. So when I saw how great design can be for businesses, yeah, baby, that's for me. And because this was during the 2008 recession, that's when I went to Apple Retail, and I wanted to know, how did design play a role? What makes their brand tick? I never thought I would be going into retail. Now, here I am talking to you, and we're two retail mavens in this space. But that was a pivotal moment for me.
I think that was so well said, and you really were, I think, ahead of the curve with marrying strategy with design, and those two are really, it's peanut butter and jelly, but I think so many folks just want something to look good, and they don't realize that functionality is actually what's important. The looking good is the table stakes. That should just be a part of the process. And before we talk about everything that you worked on and accomplished at Apple, I kind of want to talk a little bit about your time at Pratt, because if I'm not mistaken, you spent some time there as an educator as well.
That's correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience and what you learned through that, and also if there were any students that you remember that stuck out to you, kind of share your thoughts there.
So when I got my degree in design management, it was a new concept, design management. So Pratt asked me to teach it for the undergrad. And you know me, I like to have conversation. That's the way I led the class. I would introduce something and let's talk about it. Not like, okay, I need you to read textbook chapter 21 and I want you to give me your findings. No, it wasn't like that. I wanted to know what you thought about an assignment that we read together. Let's have a conversation. So what was wonderful about it is you had these design students that knew they wanted to design, but they didn't know where they were going to go with it. So what I was trying to do is unleash their inner ability that was all locked up. And then they're going, well, I never thought that it had a connection to behavior and attitude and world culture and government and so on and so forth. And suddenly they're like, oh, I have an interest in these different sectors. And that's what I loved, is the engagement I was having with these students, where they could think beyond their ability with their hand to design. But now it's like, let's use this and get you engaged with others, and so you can bring your design to the forefront. So there was a student from Japan, very, very respectful. Professor, I don't mean to be rude or disrespectful, but he would, I disagree with it. And I go, I love it, bring it on. If you can prove that you have a compelling case, great, let's talk about it. And I love how he was coming in with such respect, but he was also a little afraid, but I encouraged him to open his thoughts, his mind. And I got to learn about his culture and why he had to respect the elders, but at the same time, I respected him, and then he respected me, and we found a way to come together. And that has stuck with me ever since, is how can we have a better discourse by respecting each other without, having all these arguments, us versus them, yes, no, no. Let's have a dialogue. And that's what I loved about that student.
I think it's always fascinating when a student can teach a professor something or kind of show them a little bit about a specific area of interest, or maybe like in your case, culture that can help make the professor better. In this case, that clearly stuck out to you. And I know I've already said this, but you are such a great connector of people when you get to engage with folks. I have seen you in action. We'll talk about that a little bit later on our
I
research.
can't help myself, Mac.
But it is a gift of yours. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about your time at Apple. So first things first, I think everybody hears the name Apple and they instantly start thinking so many different products. They think innovation. They think really pushing the needle for technology and products that have helped benefit consumers for decades. I want to learn, first off, how did you even end up at Apple?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it was 2008. It was the recession. I'm coming off of this, I got laid off, and I'm in app prep. And at the same time, I invented a new product, and it's called the Akoio hearing aid battery dispenser. But I didn't have the money, I didn't have the manpower to do that, and that's where I was like, look, I know I want to do something about design and brand, and that's where I applied for a specialist role at the West 14th Apple Store in New York City. And I got in, and that is where it would keep me sane while I could get myself back on track as an entrepreneur, raising capital for this product and to, build on my design management. I figured out, give me 2 years while I stayed 10 years. And that's how I got to learn about the Apple brand, and that's where I learned about accessibility. And that's where Apple had amazing features, still does. And by the way, many people don't know this, but Apple embarked on accessibility 40 years ago. So they've been at it for quite some time. And so what I found was great features, nobody knows about it. How do we get people aware internally and externally? And that's where my career started at Apple. It's going from that local guy at West 14 to leading accessibility initiative, not just for New York City, but national and global.
And I'm sure your dad, as a businessman, was very proud of you when you were working through those again, just working from the creative and design side, and then getting your master's and then making your way to Apple. I think anybody as a businessman would be proud of their child for getting to those heights.
Well, I also want to point out that I think he would be more proud because of accessibility. We talked about my hearing, but my dad had polio. So he knew what he went through far worse than I ever had to experience. And the term then when he was growing up was crippled, handicapped, very demeaning. So I think to see, here I am at a major brand broadcasting accessibility, what a big 180 flip from what he experienced.
Your family's had a lot of adversity to deal with throughout the life of your father and through your life, of course, as well. So I think now when we think about Apple, of course, you did a lot for accessibility, but is there kind of a specific top achievement that you look back on with the most pride from your time when you were with Apple?
I treasured each moment that I was able to give an aha moment for my customers. And the feeling you would get when you see them smiling and they came in for a particular thing, but then they end up with something else. because of the exchange that we were having. That's because I was attentively listening to who they are and what their needs are, because they don't know what they want. I figured out in my head how many customers I've served. 5 days a week, at least 20 customers a day. Multiply that by 5. That's 100 customers a week. That's 400 customers a month. That's 48, right? 4,800 customers for the years times 10. That, to me, is like, look how many people I had helped serve. That gives me an amazing pride. It could take the moment. Sure, some were more personal and intimate as far as the experience goes, and then there are others that was more transactional. But how cool was it that I was able to serve that many people, and perhaps maybe 20% of those were related to accessibility? And I'm like, wow. And I didn't even think about the number of customers until many years later. I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of customers. And guess what? It's not about going in LinkedIn and trying to get all these followers. No, this was face-to-face customers, in person.
Well, speaking of impact, you've switched away from Apple and then you started your own endeavor and your entrepreneurial spirit with Akoio. And I kind of want to first ask you, was taking that leap scary? Because I can imagine it must have been difficult to make that jump.
Apple gave me the confidence to make it less scary. The fact that I knew how a brand worked, how experience worked, and what product development looks like. Because remember, I still have that invention that I still wanted to bring to market, because that is the foundation to why I started Akoio. Yes, no steady paycheck. Yes, no health plan. Where's the money going to come? You got to hustle. You got to learn new skills. Of course it was scary, but I never stopped learning. And I have learned that if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're worrying about all those things, it's like, okay, those are good signs. That's your checklist. So just put it down on paper and check it off. Tomorrow you have a new set of worries. That never goes away, that waking up where you're worrying, you're like, oh my God. But that's a given. But you learn to work with it. And you get to learn, and you make many mistakes along the way. You learn to go from, hey, this is my baby, to where you need to get good advice from other people. And that's where you get to grow, you get to blossom. And when you get to blossom and you let people in with their advice, they're going to help you with your product, your brand, your service. And that's where, you know what? Wow. People believe in what I'm doing and they want to help. That's your team. And you need to let them in. And I think with many entrepreneurs who try to consume everything and insist on doing everything themselves, they're not going to do it well. And that's where they might push people away who were so willing to help you in the beginning.
Speaking of Akoio, talk a little bit about the inspiration behind Akoio, right? Of course, you have an invention that you want to bring to market and you take a big scary leap, but also talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the Akoio brand.
It's about my own experience and how can I take my experience and make it easier for others. That's what it's about. It's about, look, you don't have to endure what I endured when you were asking me if I faced any adversity back in the day. I don't want you to have to go through it. If I can look at the technology, the tools, the ideas that can make your life easier, why not? Let's build a consultancy around that. That was the whole idea of this hearing aid battery dispenser. I wanted to make it easier to change, carry, and store hearing aid batteries. Okay, Now, what happened was, looking at the challenges of hearing loss and the market of hearing loss, it was very difficult, and that's where I decided, let me pivot and look at what you and I started working together on, and that's noise. And that is also a reflection of my own hearing issue in facing noise. So the inspiration comes from my own experience personally, and how can I talk about it and address it to the corporate sector. That is where I get inspired. To our point earlier, being shocked by what the client doesn't know, that's what I like to do is, hey, do you know about noise? Do you know about accessibility? Actually, we don't. Well, allow me to tell you all about it. I get inspired by that.
And, I think it inspires me just hearing you talk about it. And I have had the pleasure of working with you on some of this stuff, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about auditory wellness and accessibility from an auditory standpoint. Why aren't people talking about it enough? I feel like you are really pioneering a new discussion. You and Michael as well, who is a business partner of yours and also works strongly and deeply with Akoio. But can you talk a little bit about why folks are just not talking about auditory and the impact it has on us enough?
Well, when you look at auditory matter, you can't see it. It's silent. There's nothing noticeable about it. So if you look at the general realm of hearing, most people will experience a decline in hearing loss over time. So you get accustomed to it. So you get used to it. So it's not like, bam, oh, hearing loss. Sure, you have people who have sudden hearing loss situations need to be addressed. But there is nothing noticeable that will say, hey, let's talk about hearing. It's so subjective that we take hearing for granted. But people have always tried, well, why can't we talk about hearing the way we talk about vision with the glasses? And when we talk about hearing aids and all that, people are like, sorry, time out, I'm not going to go there. And I'm like, why? And they have stigma, association with older folks who had hearing aids, and it didn't work well for them, and they were very grouchy, and they don't want to be associated with that. And when they see people with disabilities, and this is the first time I'm using the word disability, I always talk about accessibility need, but when people say disability, this means this is not a good word. It means you're broken. We're not broken. We're built differently. And I think there's a lot of awkwardness. There's a lot of discomfort with accessibility and with auditory matter. They want to avoid it because they don't want to experience what that person is experiencing. And if they can avoid it, they will. But guess what? We all benefit from all those accessibility features. We all take for granted on our devices. We're using it in one way or another. That is where you can talk about the impact that accessibility has. And guess what? There's some good enhancement for your hearing. Unbeknown to you, you're noticing a difference when you use an AirPod or a Galaxy Bud or whatever. There's a feature in there that's somehow making things easier. That's a cool hearing accessibility feature, unbeknownst to you. That is where you have a much better discourse, a better direction in getting people to go, let's talk about hearing. Let's talk about auditory matters.
So would you say that a lot of brands avoid the auditory discussion just because it's kind of a hard conversation to have?
I don't think they avoid it. They're unaware of it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think what is it that some brands might be missing out on or just completely unaware of when you think of the, let's say, retail spaces? When brands have retail spaces, and they're not thinking about auditory, and they're not thinking about that way that it can boost and enhance that experience, what are they missing out on?
Communication. Imagine what the employee experience and customer experience can be like. If you're not addressing auditory matters in your spaces, that's a missed opportunity. Those are missed sales. You're missing engagement for where a customer can come back and return to shop. You're missing out on loyalty. So if they can understand what the acoustic levels are like in a space and how it's affecting, and one can hear and communicate, and how they feel with all of those noise exposure, that's where they need to consider, that's a problem. We always talk about back of house. How can we make back of house spaces best for our retailers, for their people? Well, we want to make it better. It shouldn't feel cramped. It shouldn't feel like a crummy refrigerator door or a crummy bathroom, what have you. Let's lighten it up a little bit so they can start to feel a little better. So if you can take auditory matters into the employee world in helping customers, that's a great start. And then when you consider the space for customers where they're going to enjoy their stay while shopping, you need to be considering that as well.
So you and I kicked off some awesome primary research of our own, which is, rare in these days, where a lot of folks, they will get it directly through the internet. We went ahead, we put our boots on the ground. We went to a couple different malls around Columbus, and we did some auditory audits, and we did some auditory research in the retail space. I have a lot of things that stuck out to me, but can you talk a little bit, one, of the importance of why we did that, and two, some things that may have stuck out to you on that trip?
Well, you and I quickly learned that decibel reading is not the place to start. Sure, you could take a reading, but 80 decibel at that space might be different at another space. And when a manager or employee start to reveal what they're going through, and they volunteered what they're going through, that's where we need to be paying attention. So we talked about how someone from the Apple store feels drained at the end of the day. It's like she goes home and she's exhausted. When you stop to think about the numerous conversation in a space that is Apple aesthetics, you have the concrete and the metal and the wooden table. That's their signature design for their spaces, but it's not acoustically or attenuation friendly. So that caused a lot of drains, or had me thinking about what are some of the great things that you can do design-wise for that space for a better experience. Matt, if you can recall, I don't know which clothing store it was, but they always have different clothes for the season, but the way they set up their space with all the clothes on the rack naturally were attenuation material, and how brilliant is that, and yet so lively to look at. Do you know which one I was talking about?
I do, and I believe that was a Hollister store, and I hope that was intentional, or maybe it was one of those things that was a wonderful
happy accident.
Yeah. I think, what stood out the most to me was the employee side of things, and how many employees really just could not enjoy the workday and struggled to make it through, talking about headaches. They were talking about they have to leave the mall and just sit in a quiet place for a moment. And a lot of them weren't even thinking about just the auditory side of things until we asked them, hey, is it just sometimes too loud and overwhelming and overstimulating in here? And talking about, I would lose my voice because I have to talk over the guests.
Right.
I would lose my voice because I have to talk over, my coworkers. And I think those are all such critical things to consider. And especially in a retail stage that we're in, where so many brands are worried about retention. can I keep my employees? Can I keep good staff and good managers? You have to make sure first that you foster an environment that, of course, the customer is going to love, but is functionally sound, that helps make life easier for the folks that are carrying out your brand and your brand experience. And that was extremely eye-opening for me.
Yeah, and for me, I didn't mean to cut you off, but for me, it was like, are we taking care of our people?
Yeah. So I think, but last thing on this is, what piece of advice would you offer a brand that is looking to be an early adopter of auditory wellness in their spaces?
How does your current auditory world feel? Start right there. How does it make you feel? What does employee-employer communication dynamic sound like, look like? Start right there. That's the way I would do it, without getting complex in the square footage and systems and POS and inventory control. No. How does it make you feel?
Yeah.
If I feel X, let's go and find out why you're feeling X, and then things start to unravel. The classic sense that you and I talked about in retail is the background music. Why? And that is something that predates to, I guess, the 80s, where somebody came out with the study of the impact that background music can have on the customer. Well, I think times have changed. The world was simpler auditorily then, but now we're overwhelmed with auditory matter with all of the devices we have where you're relying on audio. So we need to pull back and ask, how do you feel? Let's go to work and find out why. The key for us is what we talked about when feeling exhausted is auditory fatigue a factor in your company, at your brand? If so, why? Let's go to work.
I think that's fantastic. And, I think, again, starting this conversation early is so important, because a lot of the folks that just don't know what they don't know, and you talked about that a little bit earlier, you have to kind of show them along the way the importance of these things. And like you said, brands could be missing on sales, or an observation that we made is that they could be losing good talent because they aren't addressing things like this. And it may not visibly show up, but it'll show up on those P&Ls. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And it's something that you want to address. So, okay, real quick, before we hit a couple rapid-fire questions and wrap up, I know you're a Forbes contributor now. So, again, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I always follow your pieces, and I love your writing style and how human you are with it. Can you talk a little bit about being a Forbes contributor and the process there, and what are some of your favorite works so far?
Well, I just celebrated my first anniversary with Forbes, and what I loved about how I got into Forbes is I had an idea on an op-ed, and they liked the writing so much that they said, why don't you become a contributor? And I was like, great, let's do it. What I love is it follows my mantra of accessibility, and you know this, you and I talked about this. Accessibility is about embracing our differences for the sake of innovation. That is my blueprint. That is what guides me to all of my writing. And it's all about what are these brands doing that benefit from accessibility that allow these brands to exceed. And that's what I write about. One of the things that I am super proud of is a 3-part series I did called The Noise Economy. It's taking a look at the impact that noise has, and we're not going to look at it from, public-facing things with the subway and, the urban setting, which many people are aware of. But why don't we look at what noise means in the home, in the office? Because that affects the people who are going to help you with the work they're doing for your company. And I did the 3-part series, and people were like, wow, we never thought of it in that fashion. And I just love how it's about introducing a concept and how can companies explore it and begin to leverage it.
Very well said. Well, listen, I just want to ask a couple rapid-fire questions here, and then we will put a bow on this thing. So what's a brand, and I love asking these questions, but what is a brand that really has left an impression on you over the years?
I am not replying to you in a rapid fashion.
That's okay. You don't have to. You can take your time as well.
I think for me, 2 brands, REI and Nike. And REI is, I'm a former backpacker, and I just love how they inspire you with what you can do with canoeing and backpacking and mountaineering, but also inspires others to want to explore it. And guess what? Let's explore it together with the offerings we have. We're going to make it easier for you to go and plan a trip to start your first camping. And maybe if you like where you're going, maybe you get a little more sophisticated by climbing and mountaineering and all that. So, and what's great about their brand is you feel like you're living it without having to leave their space. Nike, not so much just do it, not so much the swoosh, but how they've been consistent from day one in what they're doing in the name of sneakers. Who would have thought that you have the Air Jordan and the science behind the structure of a shoe and the material that you use and all that, and because of what they do to encompass that sneaker, ultimately became that brand. And I just love how they've been on it time and time again.
Yeah, I think Nike's always done a really good job too. I think elevating the athletes that are Nike athletes as well, and they become these larger-than-life brand ambassadors, and, all boats rise that way. I think, another question I want to ask you is, in another life, if you weren't in the auditory field, what would you be doing for a career?
Probably doing mission work to help those who are having trouble hearing, and what can I do to help them hear better. May it be in the form of a hearing aid, may it be in the form of finding a language, if they need sign language. I want to be able to work with those people directly and do mission work around that. So doing social good is what we'd love to have a career in.
I think the last question I'll end us with is, really, is there anything shamelessly that you'd like to plug or share before we kind of wrap this thing up?
Oh, gosh. That mission work that I mentioned, my wife and I partnered with a major hearing aid manufacturer to bring hearing aids to the Philippines. And we help provide over 10,000 Filipinos with hearing aids. That is something I'm super, super proud of, and I wouldn't change that one bit. I would love to keep going with that.
Man, listen, look at this. In another life, if you weren't in the auditory field, you would be working on mission work, and then you're still doing it anyway. I think, listen, I can't thank you enough for hopping on. You're always so much fun to hang out with, and you're so inspiring as a personality, and you're so damn smart with your thoughts and your retail thinking and your business acumen. So, I really appreciate you hopping on Brands and Banter with us and, giving me the opportunity to share your story a little bit. And, for anybody that was able to stick around all the way through and hang out with Bill, hang out with myself, thank you as well for watching Brands and Banter. And if you're not subscribed to The Gist, what are you doing? We got to get you subscribed to The Gist. It's always going to be the best retail insights, best retail personalities, and awesome conversations with cool people like Bill here. So again, thanks everybody for watching, and thanks Bill for your time. And I look forward to the next time we get to hang out, my friend.
You too, Max. Such a pleasure. Really enjoyed this.